thank you so much for being on this podcast slash show. This is Art Benjamin. If you haven't seen his TED Talk, how many hits does that have? It's one of the top 10 or something, right?
I've done 3 TED Talks that have collectively earned about 12 million hits. My most popular one has about 8 million. And
the Mathemagician one, right?
Yeah, and I think it's in the top 20 or so. At one point it was in the top 5. It was like 4th. I was very excited, but I'm still excited to see that people are enjoying what I do.
Yeah, it's that. I mean, you have a lot of talks online that I've nerdily looked and watched.
I apologize.
No. I mainly to watch the 5-digit squaring.
The squaring,
I love that part. But the one you did for TED is just like spot on. You're on cue. Like as a speaker, I think you just nailed it. And it's 15 minutes. It's perfect length. My best friend actually messaged me a week ago showing me your video. He's like, "Have you seen this?" And I was like, "Oh my God, have I seen that?" I'm talking to the guy next week.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So, I mean, when did you do that? That was 2005?
It was taped in 2005. It was released online at the end of 2007, and then it went viral. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I mean, did people know of you before that? Or, I mean...
Well, I was, I'd say before that, I was known in the math community.
Yeah. Okay.
As a guy that did magic and mental math. I would do about 40 speaking engagements a year, mostly at schools and other educational or mathematical organizations. And then after the TED Talk went online, in 2008, I did like 80 speaking engagements, and they included corporate events and other, bigger, higher profile events. And it sort of went down, and now it's sort of gradually creeped up again. I'm doing about 75 groups a year. And I'm finding more people in my audience who have seen me before because of the TED Talk. So that was a little bit of a game changer.
Interesting. And did your book, which is, I mean, you have a new book out, we'll talk about that, but the Secrets of Mental Math, right?
Yes.
I thought when I got it, I guess this was in the mid-2000s, that was the new book, but it seems like you had actually released it way earlier, but
Right. So I originally wrote a book and that came out around 1995, and it was called Mathemagics, subtitled, How to Look Like a Genius Without Really Trying. And I mean, that was the book that I'd always wanted to write, but it was published by a very small publisher, and ultimately it went out of print. I mean, it did not get much distribution. So when it went out of print, I had the rights to do with it what I wanted. And in 2005, at the TED Talk, in the audience was a vice president from Random House.
Okay.
And he said, "I'd like to talk to you. Maybe you've got something." And I said, "As a matter of fact, here's what I have." And they said, we tend to only publish new books. I said, "Trust me, nobody bought the first one. It will be new to most of your audience." And so I rewrote about 20% of the book, and then it came out as Secrets of Mental Math in 2006.
Got it.
And it has done surprisingly well. I mean, I think something like 250,000 copies have been purchased, and it's just been a steady. I mean, except for the occasional spike, like when I did the Colbert Report, it's been a very steady amount. So I think there's been good word of mouth. I don't think there's any other good book on the subject that really teaches you comprehensive mental math.
Yours is very good.
It'll teach you little tricks, like how to square a number that ends in 5, how to multiply a number by 11, little things like that. And I do that in the very first chapter to give you some, empowering, this is cool. But then we get down to business and say, but you really want to be able to multiply any 2-digit numbers together. How would you really add a pair of 3-digit or 4-digit numbers? Things that are more of your bread and butter important calculations. Right. I mean, I'm a professor of math, so I'm not in for the quick buck. I'm in for really teaching people how to do this stuff. So
Yeah.
my reputation's on the line.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite books. I actually have it on my bookshelf
I
down
can
there.
see it. It's that lime green right over there. Yeah,
That's it. Yeah, but it's I'll pick it up every once in a while because it's exactly that. I mean, it starts you from the basics and builds you up, and I feel like every time I go through it, I just have like this refound ability to like attack these numbers. I'm pretty good at it, but when I read it and I practice a little bit, I get a little better.
like any skill, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So, can we talk a little bit about your upbringing? I'm curious as to like when you started doing this stuff. I feel like you've told stories where you've kind of figured out some cool algebraic stuff that you applied, and when did it take off for you? Do you think you have something different than other people, or is it?
Well,
Just...
I think I have. I mean, I probably from a very, very early age, I showed an interest in numbers and patterns.
Yeah.
And for as long as I can remember, for as long as my mother can remember, I had a very definite interest in numbers, patterns. She said when I was before kindergarten, I once asked the question, "Do two squares make a rectangle?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, but two rectangles don't make a square, which
Right.
I think is pretty high level thinking for a kid at that age to think about. There's a difference between A implies B and B implies
Right,
A,
sure.
I was diagnosed with some neurological disorders as a kid. Now that meant I was both hyperactive, and I was put on Valium from about age 4 to about age 13.
Oh wow.
I had two, I think abnormal, what were called EEGs, electroencephalographs, where they measured brainwave activity. And I think when I was like 3 and 4, they may have come out abnormal, but everyone after that had come out normal.
Okay.
And when I was about 2 or 3 years old, I guess I must have had some kind of seizure, which really freaked out my parents. So I took some kind of anti-seizure medication on top of the Valium. And I don't think that led to the ability to calculate, but I just put that out there because it's intriguing. When I read a biography by Daniel Tammet, and again, I don't know how much of that to take at its word, but it made me think, I had an experience a little bit like that as a kid. But I think really it was just a case of loving to play with numbers.
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet that there are thousands of kids out there right now who, if they put in the same amount of time and enjoyment and practice as I did, would be outperforming me. In fact, when my TED Talk first went out there, 2005, I did hear from some parents whose kids started watching it and they read my book or later get my DVD course, who were like really studying it. I knew this one 10-year-old kid who a month later he's out there squaring 3-digit numbers and doing Mathemagics shows for his middle school talent show. And
Good for him.
and so you really, with just with just a little bit of practicing it the right way, you can make substantial improvement in a very short amount of time. Now, to be squaring 5-digit numbers and doing them super fast, well, that requires probably what I had, which was, I'd call it the product of a misspent youth. Just as a kid, I liked practicing and playing with numbers. It was like others would play a video game, or nowadays I might play online backgammon. I might, in my head, say, let's see if I can do that, square that 4-digit number. And and I put some memory techniques into it. I learned in high school. I'm getting ahead of myself, but in high school, I read a book on the Memory Book by Harry Lorraine and Jerry Lucas, and which my mother showed me. She was getting her master's in special education because of her hyperactive son, me, and I was always interested in how the brain worked, and I applied some of that when I started forgetting things in a big calculation. I don't need them for squaring 2-digit or 3-digit numbers. But when I'm doing a larger problem, like a 4-digit or 5-digit, then it's convenient to turn numbers into words. You know all that very well, and it's easier to remember. If you want to hold on to 342, it's easier to remember moron or morn than it is to remember 342, especially while you have other numbers flying around. A turning point for me that I've mentioned in other interviews is it was around the 8th grade that I'd figured out an algorithm for squaring numbers. That's just on my own. I said, I noticed a pattern. Mm-hmm. I said, wow, you could use this pattern to help you square numbers quickly. And as luck would have it, a few weeks later in our algebra class, the teacher left an answer on the board as 108 squared. And being the kid that I was, I blurted out, well, that's 11,664. And she said, wow, that's right. How did you do that? And I showed her. I said, well, I went down 8 to 100, up to 8 to 116, multiplied them together to get 11,600, added the square of 8, which is 64, to get 11,664.
That's amazing.
And she said, and she was very smart, algebra teacher, and she recognized the algebra that was underneath what was going on. Though I had not done it with algebra, I don't know if that's to my credit or to my detriment. I just did it by looking at lots and lots of examples and seeing that it always worked.
And also being interested in the numbers. I mean, you were probably playing around with stuff on your own and just seeing patterns and things like that, right? I
think if most people were exposed to the beautiful patterns of mathematics, they'd be just as intrigued, that there's really great, beautiful stuff out there. Yeah. But it was a turning point in the sense that it was nobody from my middle school had seen it. Apparently no one from my high school had seen this before. So it gave me a sense of, wow, I just figured out something new. Yeah. And wouldn't it be great? It gave me the satisfaction of having figured out something on my own. And thinking, well, if I could do these problems, what if I practiced it further and did bigger ones and faster ones? That was also tied in with, I had a little bit of an incentive because I was also a magician. I mean, I grew up in a very theatrical family, and a lot of nerdy kids get into magic. It gives them a little bit of a social acceptability, unless they go overboard like I kind of did. But I would do magic shows for kids' parties throughout the east side of Cleveland, Ohio. As I started doing shows for older audiences, my father suggested I put some of my number stuff into the act because he thought it was more impressive than the fake mind reading stuff that I was learning about. And he said, and to my surprise, it got the biggest reaction of the show.
Yeah.
So that was a moment. This was around the end of high school. I said, wow, if people like that, imagine if I practiced it more and did bigger problems and such. Yeah. And so in college, I started to put together a little bit of a nightclub act. Nice. I went to Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and it got a lot of attention and sort of took off from there.
Very cool. And so how long? So I've watched, as I said, a lot of your talks, and you have a formula, right? Like it seems like you've done it, like you said, 70 times a year. But when did you develop that actual show? Like to finish with the 5-digit square, to do the
I think now when so it began with doing some calculations in the middle of what you might have called a mentalism show, mental magic kind of show, which included things like memory and sort of your pseudo-psychic kinds of tricks. And but early on, I met with some people from the critical thinking community, particularly James Randi, the magician, who was sort of labeled psychic enemy number one. Basically felt that there were people there spreading lots of false information and the public too much belief in pseudoscience and basically saying, Art, you don't need this other stuff. You should just do the stuff that's legitimate, the stuff that you could explain.
Yeah.
And so I would say it was around my first year of college that I started to put together this Mathemagics show. There was a nightclub in Pittsburgh called the Dove and Rabbit that had magicians as entertainment. And I performed there once every month or two. And the act started to develop a little bit of polish. I would do talks in some of the psychology classrooms at Carnegie Mellon. They had a strong program in cognitive psychology, and I would explain things. Just, it was just really a show and tell. And I performed at some magicians' conventions. There was the International Brotherhood of Magicians annual convention. There was a competition for magicians under 21 that was held at Abbott's Magic Get-Together in Colon, Michigan. I finished third place that year before two other really good magicians. So I was very happy with that. And so it was very gradually developed. When I finally moved out to California in 1989 to be a professor of mathematics at Harvey Mudd College, there was the Magic Castle less than 50 miles away. Yeah. And to any teenage magician, that was the mecca. That was the symbol of great magic. I mean, the best magicians in the world perform there. It was exciting just to be able to go there, but to be able to perform would say that you've made it. Yeah. So I auditioned there my first year of teaching. So I was 28 years old or so, and it went really well. I got a standing ovation even. I was really thrilled. And so they said, yes, we'd love to have you perform. So from that year on, about 1 or 2 weeks out of the year, I'd perform at this Magic Castle. And the advantage of performing there is you're doing 3 shows a night for 7 straight nights. So your act really has a chance to coalesce and converge to the good material. So your patter becomes very natural. If you say something funny in one show, you can try it out in the next show and the next one, and then it sticks in there. Whereas if you're just doing a show every 2 weeks, you might have said something funny, but forget to say it the next time, or maybe it really wasn't that funny, and you have time to...
You can mold it very nicely.
Yeah. That. So the Magic Castle was, in particular, there was this room called the Parlor of Prestidigitation, and my act really had a chance to grow up there. And again, for about 10 years, I was mainly doing shows for schools. But then after the TED Talk, 2008 or so, it changed a bit.
Sure. So. Yeah. Interesting. Can we talk a little bit about some of your squaring powers?
Sure.
Because I love watching, and I'm such a nerd that I actually... when you do the 5-digit stuff, I've watched so many of them. I actually take notes of how you say it because I'm just always curious what you're saying out loud.
Sure. And you are really hearing 90% of what's in my head. I'm not holding back. Yeah. Some people ask me, "Now you're not really doing it that way, are you?" I said, "Oh my gosh, it would be much harder to be doing it one way while pretending to do it another way." I can't multitask like that.
Yeah. So the 2-digit squares. Let's start there. Are those at this point not memorized, but are you just so familiar with them that
they are unintentionally memorized?
Right.
I've been squaring 2-digit numbers since I was 13. So for well over half my life, I've been squaring 2-digit numbers. So I just know them in the same way that you might know that 13 squared is 169, even though you weren't forced to learn that in school. You've just heard it enough times. You're a computer scientist, so you probably know 16 squared or 32 squared or 64 squared just because it shows up a lot in your work. In that same way, And when you square a 3-digit number, you do the 2-digit squares as a sub-problem. So those have been,
they're there.
Really reinforced. So yes, I freely admit that the 2-digit squares are now practically memorized. I think every now and then, maybe if I'm tired, I still find myself, doing the calculation and to check it, but they're for all intents and purposes memorized. 3-digit squares, on the other hand, though I'm sure I've squared every one of them a few times in my life, except for a dozen of them, I don't have them memorized. But they're probably familiar enough that if I give the wrong answer, I might detect that something seems wrong.
Right.
Not that let me give you an example. If I see a 2-digit square, if I see an address and it's 4624 Main Street, I'll see that 4624 and go, oh, that's 68 squared. Okay?
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have that recognition with any of the 3-digit squares. I wouldn't. Okay. I wouldn't see, oh, look, 12,996. Isn't that 114 squared? No, I wouldn't. I don't have that kind of familiarity. Whereas all of the 2-digit squares, I know in the same way that you might know all 50 capitals. Oh, Montgomery, right. Isn't that the capital of Alabama? Yeah. It's that sort of thing. So, no, I really am calculating the 3-digit squares, and I'll walk through it with you if you want. Yeah. One thing that's helpful is that I do all of my calculations from left to right. Yeah. And that's the opposite of how we do it on paper, right? And by doing it left to right, I can say the answer while I'm still calculating the rest of the answer, which was my initial incentive as a show-off kid. Do it left to right. I can say my answer, start to say it. They think you got the whole answer, whereas you just got the beginning of it. But in fact, cognitively, it makes sense. It's how you read numbers left to right, you pronounce them left to right. With practice, you can calculate left to right. And it's the more important numbers are on the left anyway. More important to know that your number is a little over 120,000 than to know that it ends in 6. Yeah. So, so that's another good reason to work left to right. But sure, I'll talk through 2-digit, 3-digit, 4-digit squares with you, whatever you'd like.
But because I'm sure some of the listeners would love to see your speed and then kind of understand what's going on in your head. Can I ask you a few 2-digit squares?
Yeah, well, just do one, because I said, I know those automatically, and then we'll do some 3 digits and so on. Guys, 2-digit square.
All right, so random, let's say 77.
5929.
Okay, and did that one just come to you?
I think I start the calculation and then I kind of slide into the answer, if you know what I mean. It's those neural pathways are so well worn that I think, there's very little friction. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, if I saw 5929 as an address or as part of a confirmation number or something, or a phone number, I would recognize that as 77 squared. So, got it. Very cool. All right, but let's do some 3-digit numbers, because those I'm really calculating.
Okay, so let's try 356.
Okay, that would be 126,736.
Wow, that's crazy.
And I don't have that one memorized. No. I really was calculating it. And because the first part of my calculation involves 400 times 312, where I'll tell you why later, but I can start to say the 120. I know when I do 4 times 312, and you can do 4 times 312, right? Left to right. Yeah. It's 1248. Yeah. So I start with 124,800. I know at that point that the answer is either going to be 125,000 or 126,000 and something. Yeah. Right? So I have enough time as I start to say 120, I now see it's going to be 6,000 and then 736. I am taking a second or two, but because I start to say the answer right away, people go.
It sounds instant. Yeah.
Like it sounds instantaneous. So what am I doing?
Yeah, let's break it down.
Let's walk through this.
So 356.
All right, but I'll back up by first doing 44 squared, which is actually part of this calculation. Okay. So let me start by explaining a 2-digit square, and then I'll do the 3-digit. So let's say I want to square the number 44. Okay.
Which is 19. Is it 1936?
It is 1936.
That's the one I just know instantly because it's almost like a year.
You know, it's very funny. It is the year my mother was born, and all her life, her favorite number was 4. Okay. Her email address even has a 44 in it.
Oh, wow.
And only recently did I make the connection of the 44 and the 1936. I mean, completely random for her too, but that's pretty funny. So 44. So what do? I go down 4 to 40.
Yep.
I balance it by going up 4 to 48.
So you find the nearest 10, basically.
Nearest multiple of 10. I always do that for my 2-digit squares. So 44, the nearest easy number is 40. I go down 4 to 40. I go up 4 to 48. Now I do 40 times 48. Yeah. And that's 4 times 48 with a friendly 0 attached. Now to do 4 times 48, we do it left to right. 4 times 40 is 160. Yeah. 4 times 8 is 32. Add those from left to right. Now think about it. 160 plus 32 is 192. Attach the 0, because we're really multiplying by 40, to get 1920. Now you could stop there and you'd have a great estimate. To get it exactly, though, all you have to add is the square of the number you went up and down. And you went up and down 4. 4 squared is 16. So 1920 plus 16 is 1936.
Got it. Yeah.
I'll do one more example for your audience that'll be easier for them to follow. Okay. Let's take a big number like 97.
Yeah.
This time the nearest easy number would be 100. So we'll go up 3 to 100. We go down 3 to what?
To 94.
94, right? Because I went 90. I went up 3. I have to go down 3.
Yep.
So 100 times 94 is simply 9,400. You could start to say that answer right now, 9,400. And what do you add to that? The square of 3, because you went up and down 3.
Yep.
Square of 3 is 9, and there's your answer, 9,409.
Nice.
Okay. Now let's bring this up to 3-digit squares. So for 2-digit squares, I round to the nearest 10. For 3-digit squares, I round to the nearest 100.
Yeah.
So when you give me 356, I round that up to 400. I go up 44 to 400. I go down 44 to 312. Now, I'll give you a little pro tip here. I don't actually do the subtraction. I don't actually do 356 minus 44 to get 312. Okay. What I actually do is I double the number you gave me, 356.
Yeah.
Double it at 712. And the numbers I'm going to multiply are going to have the same total as double the original number. That kind of makes sense, right? Because if we went up 44 and down 44, they're going to have the same total as twice 356.
That's true. Yeah, interesting.
And it's easier for me to just double the 356 to get 712. In fact, I only really have to double the 56 to get 112. Yeah. And to know that if one of my numbers is 400, the other has to be 312. In order for that total to be 712, okay?
Got it.
So I actually don't do subtraction, which is neat, right? So
yeah, because I mean, to do that I was going to ask is like that's hard for some people to do very fast, the subtraction part, you know.
But if I said double 56 and it's 112, now you know the number is 312.
That's cool. That's a nice trick. Yeah.
It's always gonna start with the same first digit as you know, like if you say 300 and something, then I'm either gonna go down 300 to something in the high 300s, or I'm gonna go up to 400 times something in the low 300s.
Right.
So you know, when you say 800 and blah blah blah, I'm gonna multiply something by something that's in the 800s, and I can figure out the the last two digits just by doubling your number. So if your number ended in 42, then I double that to get 84. If your number was 84, ended in 84, I double that to get 168. I'm going to multiply it by something ending in 68.
Interesting. Oh, that's clever.
It is,
that's really
right?
good. Yeah.
So it saves a second or so in the calculation, and I don't need the 44 if you were squaring 356. I don't need that 44 until much later. So,
Right.
you know, why get it involved just now? So you say 356. So I go. I double it to get 712. I do 400 times 312. Now 4 times 312 is 1,248, so that's 124,800.
Okay.
Quickly, I do the square of 44, because that's one that, and there too, when you say 356, I know the complement of 56 is 44. In other words, if I owed you 56 cents and I gave you $1, you give me 44 cents change back, right? That's the complement of 56. So I have 124,800 plus the square of 44, which I know is 1,936. So now I can start to say 126,000 while I add the 800 and the 936 to get the 736 for the rest of the answer.
That's awesome.
Give me another number. I'll do it. Do you want me to think out loud while I do it, or you want me to just say the answer?
No, let's say it out loud. Is that cool?
Yep.
All right, let's say 578.
Okay, 600 times 556 is 333,600 plus 484 is 334,084.
That's awesome. I feel like it would have been faster if you hadn't said any of that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's why I asked if you wanted the because I can only speak so fast without sputtering.
Exactly.
So but I slowed down, but I gave you the steps that I really was doing. Here, give me another one. This is fun.
It's 213.
200 times 226 is 45,200 plus 169 is 45,369.
Yeah. I'm going to give you an easy one. 995.
990,025.
Yeah.
Right? I went up 5. You could do that. I got up 5 to 1,000, down 5 to 990. 990 times 1,000 is 990,000.
5 squared, yeah.
That's 5 squared.
Yeah. That's awesome. And now, so I've seen you do the 4, I've seen you do the 5. Have you ever tried like more?
Well,
6, 7?
when I was in college, I remember still I was in my spring semester of my first year. I was taking a class in cognitive psychology because naturally I was very interested in that. And we had a teacher, Professor Marcel Just, who one day in his topic he was talking about, he says, to understand the brain, it's good to understand people sort of at the extremes. And he talked about people who did lightning fast calculations. And then he said, now there are some tricks for doing certain easy kinds of problems. And he demonstrated a couple of these tricks, like taking the fifth root of a perfect fifth power, you know. And he said, now I know I've got a lot of math and engineering types in this audience. Does anyone else here know any tricks? And I suspected he knew about me, but I said, I decided, oh, what the hell? So I raised my hand, and I then took over the classroom for 10 minutes doing my nightclub act that I was just developing. And you know, he was impressed, of course. And now when you do a psychology class at almost any college campus, you become, as part of your class requirement, you have to participate in some psychology experiments. Okay. That's where the professors and grad students get their volunteers. Yeah. And I talked to him afterwards. I said, you know, I'm willing to do these experiments, but if there's a professor here who'd like to, you know, learn about my cognitive processes, I'd be happy to. And he says, you know, I think we've got just the person. And he introduced me to a fellow named William Chase. Okay. And Bill Chase was famous in the psychology community for doing an experiment with another psychologist named Herb Simon. And it was about the memory of chess positions. Okay, yeah. And right, so you know this. That is when showing random chess positions to masters versus novices, the masters could memorize it in a few seconds. You know, novices would not be able to, would have a hard time to do it. But when the chess player, the masters were shown not random chess positions, but the board filled with pieces put at random, nonsensical, would never arise in any game, they were just as bad as the novices, which showed that the chess masters had some structure to their, you know, that they were able to chunk things and say, I see a fianchettoed bishop over here, castled on the queen side, and doubled pawns over there, et cetera, et cetera. I used to play chess. So they, you know, so that it would be easier for them to make sense of the whole, they would see the story there. Anyway, so he was interested in skilled memory. He also had done an experiment, and you should look up this paper, given your interest in memory, on that showed had two students who were able to expand their digit recall from 7 digits to ultimately about 100 digits.
I think I know. I think it's talked about in Josh Forrest's book, actually.
It might be by Chase and Erickson. And Erickson is the same guy who, Anders Ericsson, who's the expert on expertise. Okay. Right? The 10,000 hours guy.
Got it.
He was a postdoc at Carnegie Mellon working with Bill Chase when I was an undergraduate there. So I actually did a little bit of work with them. So there's his paper by Chase and Erickson talks about digit span, and it concerns two runners. That's right. Yeah. Long distance runners who first was with one student, then a couple years later this other student. But what they'd come up with was thinking of the numbers as they were called out as running times. Like if the first 4 digits was 3, 5, 6, 2, they'd say, 3:56.2 would be an excellent mile time. Right. You know, 3 minutes, 56.2 seconds. And then for a while they plateaued at about 28 digits because they would be memorizing like 7 running times. Yeah. And then at some point they turned a corner and had a whole track meet, you know, with a superstructure of that allowed them to memorize things. And it sort of contradicted the classic result by Miller that there were 7 plus or minus 2 digits that we could memorize. So they were interested in my memory because they said, look, anyone can multiply 4-digit numbers on paper. Right. Why can't we do it in the head? We run out of memory. So what's he doing? And they tested my memory. Like if they gave me, if they called out 10 vegetable fruit names, I was no better at reciting those 10 names back than anybody else. Yeah. But if with numbers and I could get phonetics involved, then it becomes much easier. Yeah. But my working memory was nothing special. And even now I would say, maybe I can hold 8 to 10 digits at a time in the calculation, but I'm saying my answer partly to get it out of my memory and into yours, right? Right. And when I do a sub-calculation, that number is usually immediately put into the next calculation. As I try not to store numbers, put them aside, and do a separate calculation. And if that separate calculation is going to take literally more than a few seconds, then I have to code that stored result into a word so I don't forget it. Yeah. But ideally, I start saying my answer so I can forget things, right? Anyway, so I forgive me for going off on all these tangents.
No, it's fascinating.
PhD here at work, but so I got to meet and work with Professor Chase. Oh, by the way, if you ever look up that paper by Chase and Erickson, they compare these two runners who were initialed SF and DD. Their names were Steve Falloon and Dario Donatelli. And then they actually have a comparison with a college student memory expert named AB, and that was me.
That was you, okay.
I am AB.
That's
in that
too funny.
paper. I'm in the acknowledgments. Thanks for
Cool.
So people might have inferred that, but I'm coming out to say I am AB.
You are AB. Make it known.
and I would use phonetics to memorize digit spans, and wasn't as quick or as fast as they were, but I was pretty competitive. So,
cool.
So there it is. Anyway, so I worked with Bill Chase for my 3 or 4 years at Carnegie Mellon, and then this goes back to your original question of have I gone beyond the 5-digit squares? So when I started, I was squaring 3-digit numbers fast. I was just starting to square 4-digit numbers. I was just putting that into my act.
Yeah.
And I really thought that multiplying 2 different 3-digit numbers was out of my range.
Okay.
But while I was working with him and I understood my processes better and I used those mnemonics more frequently, the phonetic code, by the time I finished college, I was able to multiply 2 different 6-digit numbers together.
Wow.
Now, sometimes it would be shown to me on paper so I wouldn't have to remember the problem. Sometimes they'd say, okay, here's the 6-digit problem. And the first thing I'd have to do would be to encode the 12 digits. I'd have to get 4 3-digit words. So the first 6-digit number, okay, 824, okay, that's finer, okay, and then, 329, that's man up, okay, finer, man up, times, so it would take me 30 seconds, maybe even just to encode the problem.
Yeah.
And those would take me 5 to 10 minutes. I mean, squaring would be much, much easier.
Because what do? You would do you take the 3 chunks and do those two, and then the cross?
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what I'm doing. And when I'm doing, if I do a pair of 5-digit numbers, and sometimes you may have caught some video footage, I've occasionally multiplied 2 different 5-digit numbers.
I haven't seen that.
I'll only do that if the first 5-digit number is really friendly. Like if the first 2 digits were, 24 or 12 or something, and the 3-digit number, if it was 996, I'd say, okay, that's 1,000 minus 4. That'll be an easy thing to multiply. Or it's 324, which I can factor as 9 times 6 times 6. I mean, if the number's friendly enough and I'm feeling confident enough, I'll actually multiply different 5-digit numbers. But I still like to have the number in front of me, so a lot less to remember.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point is, I would get the answer right about 50% of the time. So on the first time. So if I was doing 2 different 6-digit numbers, it took me 5 to 10 minutes, and I got it right about half the time. If I could see the problem, it would take me less time. My accuracy would go up. But yeah, so there's somewhere out there tons of data. Professor Chase passed away about a year or 2 after I had finished my bachelor's degree. Tragically, so did the SF, Steve Falloon. He had picked up some kind of blood disease, and it might have been AIDS. It was the early 80s that came through like his running shoes. I think he must have had some blood transfusion, and I'll bet and it was tainted with something. And he had to have transfusions for a couple years, and then he passed away. Dario Donatelli he may be the track coach at Carnegie Mellon still. Okay. I think he's stayed there. But Professor Chase, he passed away running on the track. He must have been late 40s, early 50s, and had a heart attack. He had no prior heart condition, but he had a heart attack, and they found him the next day. So, and that ended that research, I think. But
interesting.
Yeah.
But that's fascinating. The 6 digits. Wow. Have you ever thought about competing in the mental calculation World Cups?
Well, I haven't. It's always been in Europe.
Have you looked into them a little bit?
Only in that I've noticed it, and I've gotten invitations each year to come out. It's always been over the summer in Europe. Yeah. Sometimes it wouldn't it would cost me to come out there. It's not like they'd be
Right.
paying my travel and compensating me in any way. And for me, the mental calculation, believe it or not, has always really been a hobby.
Okay.
And I'm sure, if I wanted to be at peak performance, like to be peak performance of anything.
Yeah.
Literally anything, because if you're not giving it 150%, someone else is. If you really want to be top of the top, you have to do that. And I'm interested in so many other things, and let me get that off on the record. I love mental calculation, but I like pure mathematics, combinatorics, playing backgammon, going to the theater, writing song lyrics, spending time with my wife and 2 daughters. I mean, I've got a very, it's. I'm sure there are thousands of people out there who can calculate raw calculation faster than me, but at least there aren't too many that have created an entertaining
show
evening about it. And I think many of them are introverted and not the kind that like to go up on stage. I know that the Calculation Cup is in Las Vegas this year.
Yeah.
I was contacted by one of the organizers, Scott Flansburgh.
Yeah.
And he asked if I'd be willing to come out for that. And barring some kind of conflict and depending on my teaching schedule, I will try to make it, even if only to do a
demo,
a session, a Q&A, like what we're doing here. I'd love to get, if you're there and I'm there and you want to interview me in front of a panel or in front of an audience like we're doing now, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, that would be great. I'll be there. I'm going to do the memory side of things, but I was going to maybe try and do the math stuff just for fun.
Why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I had gone, if I had read Joshua Foer's book when I was in high school, there's no doubt in my mind I would be trying to learn the deck of card memorization, the whole, subject, action, object.
Yeah.
I think it's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
I think with just a little bit of an investment of effort, getting your images and actions for all 52 cards times 3, would be fun. And combine that with a memory palace. I think that would be a fun thing to do. But I think that ship has sailed for me. I mean, if I really wanted to, I would. But too many other things I enjoy doing right now.
Yeah, that's what it happens. Is you're good at one thing, but eventually someone gets better than you, and it's have the time to...
you could set a world record for solving the Rubik's Cube. Somebody someday will break it.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, live with it. That's fine.
That's awesome. So we can wrap up soon. I've had you for a long time. I feel really honored.
This has been great fun. Yeah,
that's good. But tell me about your new book.
Thank you. My first book was really getting people excited about arithmetic, mental and arithmetic and otherwise. And my second book is really what goes beyond arithmetic. So, the math that we see in school, in middle school and high school, whether it be algebra, geometry, trigonometry, calculus, pi, infinity, Fibonacci numbers, some of that's important math and some of it's just beautiful math. And I feel that, especially nowadays with all this emphasis on testing, a lot of the fun stuff has just been cut out of the picture. So this was my attempt at teaching math to the masses in what I think is a fun, magical way. So it's called The Magic of Math, Solving for X and Figuring Out Y, which I'm very proud of the subtitle. Thank you. And I want people to see there's more to math than just slogging through equations. And yet I introduce you to all the important stuff, but I want to fill it with the fun stuff as well. So that's been, and I'm very pleasantly surprised. It's gotten off to a very strong start. It made the New York Times bestseller list for education in September, the month it came out. It'll come out in paperback in the fall of 2016, and I'm hopeful that I mean, my first book still continues to sell well, and I think it will outlive me. I hope this other book does as well, but we'll see.
That's good. Yeah, I have it downloaded on my Kindle. I'm gonna get into it. I have to finish a couple other books, but.
Okay.
But anyways, thank you so much for taking an hour out of your day to speak to me. It's so exciting to talk to you. I mean, I read your book way back when, and here I am with you.
Well, it's delightful to know that my book, my work, my ideas, continue to live on, and get people like yourself and your listeners to, enjoy life in a new way. So
there you go. Well, good. I'll share links to your book and your website in the description below, and you seem like a very open person to reach out to if anybody's
Absolutely.
interested.
If I make it to Vegas in October, I'll be in touch and we'll get together.
Yeah.
What we've done, I assume, was that entirely an audio podcast or was that a video podcast?
No, it's video as well.
Oh, okay, good. So I talked as if it were video, but then you said podcast, so I thought, maybe
I split them up, so it'll be podcast as well. But
oh, great. All right, Nelson, wonderful talking with you, and let me know when you put it up.
Perfect. I will. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.